the land of ice and snow. The Viking world was shaped by its climate. In summer, it was a land of brightness. The days seemed to never end. Sunlight lingered on the fjords, glimmering across the water in endless reflections. Grass and wildflowers covered the meadows. Sheep, goats, and cattle grazed freely. Children played outside well into the night, for the sun barely dipped beneath the horizon before rising again. But winter. Winter was another story. When the months of darkness arrived, the land seemed to belong to another world entirely. The daylight dwindled to a few hours, sometimes disappearing altogether. In the far north, there were days when the sun did not rise at all. Only the pale shimmer of the moon and the faint flicker of the northern lights broke the darkness. Snow blanketed the land, weighing down roofs, pressing against doors, piling high along the edges of paths. The seas grew treacherous, their surfaces coated with ice, their spray freezing upon the planks of Viking ships. The forests grew silent, save for the whisper of the wind and the occasional crack of a branch snapping under snow. The air was sharp, clean and biting. Step outside without proper furs, and the chill sank instantly into your skin, down to your bones. Even the strongest warrior could not ignore it. This was the world in which the Vikings lived. It was a land of endurance. From childhood, they were raised to accept the cold as a companion. A child carried water from an icy stream. A young boy herded animals through snow that reached his knees. A girl spun wool with fingers stiff from frost. And as they grew, they did not expect comfort. They expected struggle. They expected to be tested. The cold was not simply an inconvenience, it was a teacher. It hardened the body but also shaped the mind. For if you could live through these winters, if you could sail across frozen seas and farm beneath gray skies, then you were strong enough to stand among warriors, and so, when the time came to sleep, the Viking warrior did not expect softness. He did not expect silence or warmth in abundance. He expected the cold to be present, always lingering at the edges of the fire's glow. Yet still, he found sleep. Because while the world outside froze, the Vikings built spaces of refuge. Their longhouses, their hearths, their layers of wool and fur, all were weapons against the winter. And through them, the warrior could close his eyes and drift into dreams. Even while the storm howled outside, inside the longhouse now, let us step inside one of these Viking longhouses. It is long and narrow, stretching perhaps 50 or 60 feet in length, sometimes even more. Its walls are built of heavy timbers sealed with clay or mud. Its roof is steep, covered with turf and earth, a natural blanket of insulation against snow and wind. Down the center runs the hearth. A channel of glowing coals, fed with logs that crackle and send sparks upward. This is the heart of the hall, its warmth and its light. The air is thick with smoke, for though a hole in the roof lets some of it escape, much of it lingers, blackening the beams above. The scent clings to wool cloaks and hair. To us it may seem stifling, but to the Vikings it was simply the smell of life, the smell of safety. Along the walls run raised wooden platforms, wide enough for a person to lie upon. By day they serve as benches, by night they are beds. Warriors, farmers, women, children, all take their places here when the time comes to sleep. There are no bedrooms, no doors to close, no privacy to retreat into. The longhouse is a shared space, a single room where all of life unfolds. To our modern eyes, it might seem crowded, even chaotic. But to the Viking, it was natural. It was warmth, the fire glows at the center. People lie upon straw-filled mattresses, layered with furs and cloaks. The closer to the hearth, the warmer the air. At the far edges of the hall, in the shadows, the chill lingers, and breath rises in faint clouds. There is sound, always sound. The crackle of fire, the low murmur of voices as the last conversations drift away. The snort of animals, for cows, goats, or sheep, are often kept inside during the worst of winter, their bodies adding heat to the hall. The rustle of straw as someone shifts. The deep, rolling snores of men who sleep heavily after long days of labor. The longhouse is alive, even in rest. And in this place, the Viking warrior sleeps. Not alone, not in silence. But among kin and comrades wrapped in fur, with the warmth of the hearth at his side and the nearness, how did Viking warriors sleep through the cold? A soothing historical monologue for sleepless historians' epics. The North has always been a land of extremes. Long winters that swallowed the sun for months. Nights that stretched endlessly, broken only by the flicker of firelight and the howl of winds across frozen fjords. And yet, from these frozen lands emerged the Vikings, farmers, raiders, traders, poets, warriors, men and women who endured what would break softer souls. One might wonder, in such bitter cold, how did these warriors sleep? How did they find rest when frost rimmed the doors of their homes, when snow lay heavy on the roof, when the sea wind clawed through cracks in the timber? To answer that, we must walk back in time. We must step into the longhouse. We must cross the threshold of those smoky, firelit halls where the Viking found his warmth, his comfort, and his dreams, the land of the North, before we enter the hall. Let us understand the world outside. The Viking Age stretched across the 8th to 11th centuries, a time when Scandinavia was colder than it is today. Winters began early and lingered long. Snow covered the ground for months. Lakes froze hard enough to bear the weight of men, horses, and sledges. The wind off the North Sea was cruel. It sliced through wool and fur. It bent trees, drove sea spray far inland, and carried the bite of salt and ice into the very marrow of those who felt it. Nights could last 16, even 18 hours in the depths of winter. Imagine the darkness, broken only by torchlight or the glimmer of embers. Imagine the silence, until broken by wolves, by the creak of ice, by the booming of wind through mountain passes. This was the world the Viking called home. A land where warmth was not comfort, but survival. Where fire was not luxury, but life itself. And so, when the warrior laid down to sleep, it was never careless. Every layer of fur, every ember of fire, every body pressed close was part of the fragile pact between man and cold. The longhouse, a shelter of smoke and timber. Step with me now inside the longhouse. It is vast, though dark. The roof arches overhead like the hull of a ship turned upside down. Thick beams of oak and pine rise from the packed earth floor. The air smells of smoke and animals, of wool, leather, and sweat. Along the center runs the hearth, a long trench filled with glowing embers and flickering flames. Smoke curls upward, escaping through a hole in the roof. Though much lingers in the air, stinging eyes and settling into hair and clothes, here, in this smoky warmth, the Viking people lived. Worked, ate, and slept. The longhouse was no palace. It was a fortress against winter. Its walls were timber, often chinked with clay or turf to keep out the wind. Its roof was thatch or sod, heavy with snow in winter, but strong enough to bear the weight. And always, at the center, the fire. The fire was never allowed to die. It burned through the night, tended by those who stirred from sleep to add logs or peat. Without it, the longhouse would grow cold, frost would creep across the walls, and life itself could be threatened. Around this fire, warriors took their rest, not in solitude, but together, not in silence, but in the steady rhythm of a household bound by necessity. Sleeping arrangements, at the edges of the longhouse, wooden platforms lined the walls. These were the beds of the Vikings, not soft, not cushioned, but raised above the cold earth. Upon them straw was spread. Fresh straw crackled beneath the hand, smelled sweet, and offered some softness. Over time, it grew flat, damp, and dirty, and so it was replaced regularly. On top of the straw, furs and woolen blankets were laid. Wolf pelts, bearskins, sheepskins, all hard-earned, all cherished. A good fur could mean the difference between a night's rest and a night of shivering misery. Here, entire families slept together. Parents with children, warriors with comrades, the old beside the young. Privacy was not part of the Viking night. Instead, warmth and companionship were its treasures. The platforms were wide, and several people could share each. Warriors traveling or visiting might bed down beside their hosts, rolling out cloaks and settling close. The body heat of many people together was as precious as any fire. Pillows were rare. At times, a folded cloak served. More often, a warrior lay his head directly upon the bundled straw or upon his own arm. Comfort was measured not in softness, but in endurance. The hearth light flickered across their faces as they drifted to sleep. Shadows leapt upon the roof beams, fire cracked, smoke drifted, and the murmur of breathing filled the hall. This was Viking rest, not silence, not luxury, but survival through shared warmth. Clothing at night, the Viking did not undress for sleep. There were no nightgowns, no linens reserved for the dark hours. Instead, he wore the very garments he had carried through the day: a linen undershirt, a woolen tunic, trousers, and a heavy cloak. Wool was the great ally of the North. Even when damp, it held heat. Even when battered by snow and rain, it guarded life.